Welcome, everybody. I'm Ed Arnold, Vice President of Products here at Leverage Point. This is another half-hour webinar in our monthly series of thought leadership in the area of pricing, sales, and marketing. Leverage Point provides a software solution for value-based pricing. You can find out more about us by visiting our website, leveragepoint.com. That's where you'll find the recording for this and all our previous webinars, plus other resources. Let me introduce this month's topic and speaker. We're thrilled to have Jim Geisman joining us today. Jim is a seasoned high-tech executive who has worked at a number of leading firms, including BB&N and Apollo Computer. Currently, he runs a consultancy called Software Pricing Partners, where he advises clients on pricing, sales, and marketing. He's a board member of the Mass Tech Leadership Council, the leading technology trade association in New England. He's also a board member of the Professional Pricing Society. The title of today's presentation is How to Develop a Value Proposition That Sells. Specifically, Jim will provide his practical advice and tips for B2B marketing and sales professionals to improve and communicate their value propositions. Again, this is a 30-minute presentation. Use the Q&A feature from the side panel or chat panel to provide questions during the presentation, and at the end of our talk, we will have a Q&A session. So with that, let me turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Ed. Just get rid of this thing. There. Well, I'm going to let people fiddle around with the technology here, but I want to thank you very much for attending and giving up a piece of your day for this presentation. We're going to be focusing on B2B value propositions in this half hour, and if we don't get around to answering your questions, you can always shoot me email and I'll get back to you. Well, first of all, I think, we've all seen value propositions that have a lot of words, and I call them yada yada value props. But, the problem is that what happens to be most credible are the quantifiable economic benefits. The words are easy to do. Coming up with the numbers is a little more difficult, and in many cases, even if you are nearly identical to your competitor, if you can do a better job of quantifying your economic benefit, you'll be better off and more credible in the eyes of your prospects. We do workshops, here and overseas, and one of the little caselets that we use is about a real estate CRM package, and I just want to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about. And that is, here on the left side are the economics, the left side top, are the economics and what goes on at a real estate agent, and the blue arrows represent the improvement that you can get in each of those areas, yielding an overall improvement to both the agent personally and the brokerage overall. And I'm not advocating that you go out and do very detailed studies. Often rough numbers, roughly right is better than precisely wrong. And in many cases, it just makes more sense to have really good estimates so that the customer can wind up owning the numbers anyhow. Well, if you want to develop a value prop, and presumably you do, that's why you're here, it really starts off by understanding who your market is and maybe even the segments in those markets, and then understand the economic drivers of the customer's business, be they a manufacturer or a service provider. And then in that commercial context, you want to understand what your product service economic impact is. And if you happen to have some unique value-adding features that really are unique and really do add unique value, you really want to understand the economic benefit of those because that will support what I hope will be a premium price. And then it boils down to sort of estimating the economic value, and there are a number of ways of doing that. There are third-party research reports available. You can talk to people that have been around the industry for a long time, or if you have experience with your customers, you can use your own personal experience, or you can always use an onagerous guess. And for those of you that don't know what an onager is, it's a wild ass, and in fact, that's what a lot of people do. Make it scientific, though. And I guess along those lines, I'd really be curious, and we'll do a poll here, on where you get your numbers for assessing the economic impact. And because this is an anonymous poll, you can your answer won't be attributed to you, even if it happens to be the fifth one.
So, Aaron, why don't you put up a polling question? That should be on your screen right now. Where do you get your numbers for assessing economic impact of your product or service? Pick one of these 5. A, third-party research. B, industry insiders. C, personal experience. D, swags. And E, we don't often use numbers. So we'll keep that open for a moment.
Yeah, and I think the key here is you don't have to spend an awful lot of money on primary research. I think if you do primary research, that obviously has a high degree of credibility, providing it's objective. And frankly, I think one of the failings of people that develop numbers in a value proposition is it's not really a fair and true presentation. It overstates the benefits and it understates the costs or the risks. Can we see what the responses look like as they
Just
come
give
in?
it another minute as the responses are still coming in.
Okay.
Jim, in my experience, there's always this concern about accuracy.
Well, I mean, if we were that concerned about accuracy, we'd all be celibate. But I think the real, I'm sorry, for those of you that perhaps didn't get that obscure reference, if we really were accurate, we probably wouldn't get married and we probably wouldn't date until we found exactly the right person. However, I think close enough is good enough in many cases. And ultimately, you're presenting this to an outsider, and they're going to wind up owning the numbers. So as long as you have some credible numbers and some good logic behind it, and you can back up your numbers, then you can hand them over to the other party, and they will do with them what they need to do.
Oh.
So the polling is now closed, and can we share the results, please?
Just 1 second as they finish tallying. All right.
So you care to make any guesses on what the most common response will be?
Gosh, it's somewhere between D and E. I think people use swags or they don't use numbers very often. And I guess, probably personal experience will be right up there.
All right.
All right. Are you seeing the results now, Ed?
No, they're not on our screen. Can you see them?
Yeah, I'll just read them out for you.
Okay.
We've got third-party research, 20%. Industry insiders, 16%. Same for personal experience. And then much lower down, we have wild guesses at 5%, and we don't often use numbers at 9%.
9%.
So,
okay.
Most of the audience uses one of the first 3 responses.
Well, that's great. That's wonderful, and I hope you're telling the truth. I assume you are. In any event, when you're assessing the economic impact, it really falls in 2 buckets. One is revenue, the other is cost. And relative to revenue, you can increase revenue, you can drive it in faster, or if you are in markets that are in decline, you can keep your revenues at a steady level. On the cost side, clearly you can decrease costs, you can push them out in time, or you can avoid them. Now, however you quantify these benefits, revenue or cost, there are a number of factors that affect how people look at them and how they evaluate your offering. I mean, there's the risk, which includes what's the probability of it occurring and how predictable is the outcome. There's timing, when it comes, when the benefits come, and how long the benefits last. And of course, there are some associated costs, which are out-of-pocket costs, usually for acquiring your offering. But there are also opportunity costs, and perhaps the biggest opportunity cost there is the management time. And often, if your offering has high technology insertion costs, meaning it's disruptive to an operation, the management time it will take to bring this product in will be too large, and you really won't get a fair hearing. One of the things that we found over time is that you really ought to take your offering and somehow take those economic benefits and align them with the revenue impact. And the reason for that is whatever you do, let's use the first example of an accounting package. You have an accounting group, and of course we all love accountants, and we all see the clear need for accountants, and gosh, if we could afford it, we'd buy more of them. Except for one thing, they're just considered overhead. So if you're going to increase the productivity of an accountant, certainly you may wind up saving costs. But that isn't as effective as collecting money, some period of time faster, because maybe the invoicing is, more accurate, and customers aren't going to complain about what they're getting billed for. They may complain about the amount that they get billed, of course, but that's a different issue. Here I think is a real good example of why you should focus on revenues rather than costs. The costs that you're going to be saving here accrue to the handful, or maybe two hands full, of accountants, but the results and the impact on revenue translates into every single invoice. So there's a multiplier effect. And therefore, really, I'd suggest you try to align yourself with revenue impact. So, for example, in the insurance application, you make fewer errors, but that isn't the issue. The issue is you get to write more policies because, they conform to underwriting policies. In a customer service center, lower cost per call is important, but you get more money out of customers the longer you retain them. And on the industrial coating side, maybe this is a spray coating that gives you better coverage at lower costs. But what this really means is that if you're able to do this, you might be able to take this manufacturing process and produce more stuff over a product lifetime. So I hope you get the idea that focusing on the revenue impact is a good thing to do, and try and force a discipline on your marketing team to think in terms of revenue impact as opposed to just cost impact. And by the way, if you can't figure out what your revenue impact is, that's okay. At least have a good cost saving story. Well, developing a value proposition really doesn't mean anything unless you're going to use it, and you need to present a value proposition through a sales force, whether that's a inside sales force, an outside sales force, or indirect. And what you want to do is tailor this value proposition according to the audience that you're targeting. And for example, you may have somebody who's an advocate for your offering inside a company, and they're going to need some in-house sales tools. Well, those sales tools have got to be used with the people that are going to evaluate the product and approve the product. And I think in all of these cases, depending on the audience, the purpose, the call to action, will be different. The call to action to somebody who is not currently but can become an advocate is to become an advocate. Similarly, for somebody to evaluate it, the call to action there is to use the value proposition as a way to say, yeah, this is a pretty reasonable thing to do. And then, of course, the approver, what you're really going for is making sure that they're comfortable. And by the way, the detail ought to match the audience, somewhat like the punishment fitting the crime. But people respond to different things. People respond to presentations. They respond to brochures. They respond to reports, words. The Leverage Point website is a good example, and many people are influenced by graphics, and this graphic comes from the Leverage Point tool that shows where the value is and where the costs are. The value, by the way, is in the green, and the costs are in the red. And what you really want to do is persuade the customer that they are getting good economic value and that they really ought to pay you for it. Well, how do you persuade? This isn't a course in communications, but I think it's important that you create a context and then you instill confidence in what you say. And that context, delivery, lots of different ways to do that. The content really is obviously key. And one of the things that we see is a lot of content just doesn't pass the so what test. Somebody ought to look at it and, they ought to be reminded of what's in it for them, and they move from there to absorbing what you have to say, and they're taken through this in a logical fashion. And then once you sort of have them, curious enough, then what you really want to do is instill enough confidence to either try or buy your product. And what that really means is giving a balanced view of what it is that you do. What you do comes at a cost, and everybody knows that, but you better be straight up about that. And to the extent that you have some proof points, both in terms of numbers, preferably numbers that are provided by your customer, I think that increases the credibility. But it's been my experience that you can do these things, but if your word is not your bond and you're not committed to making your customer successful, your credibility is largely wasted. And if you mess up with a customer, we all know that a satisfied customer tells 3 of his friends, and a dissatisfied customer tells a dozen. As just a sidebar comment, Dan Ariely, who wrote a book called Predictably Irrational, I think that was the book in which this anecdote came. He was talking about an Audi that he owned. So in a case like this dissatisfied customer told about 200,000 people about his dissatisfaction with Audi. So don't let that happen to you. I think one of the things that we often forget about is the risk. We talked about risk a little bit, and I think there's been some recent studies that have shown that people are more risk averse than they are gain seeking. In other words, you can promise them the world, but what they will do is they'll downplay that if one of the risks is losing their job. So you really need to deal with this issue of risk in order to be successful. Well, I think we've come pretty much to the end of this, so that we can take questions. And if you have questions that we can't answer here, we'll answer them later. In summary, I just want to remind you of some of the key points. You really are better off taking your value proposition, your economic value proposition, and talking about the economic impact. It's okay to talk about costs. In effect, you're changing the cost structure. And also the timing of these benefits is important. Sooner is better than later, as we all know. The perception of value, which you largely mold by the way you communicate it and the nature of your product, the perception of value is reality. And, you need to manage that reality very carefully because the reality has in it things that you probably don't want to talk about, which are risks or costs. Now, you may not want to talk about those things publicly, but you better allude to them because nobody's a fool in general. And in terms of communicating your value proposition, make it simple, make it understandable, make the case logically. And at the end of the day, what you would really like to do is have the customer own the numbers. So, for example, if on your website you have an economic value proposition calculator, let people play with it and do what-if games. Also, what we found is the more legs of the value prop you have, the better off you are, up to a point. Maybe a half a dozen is really the point. Because in some situations, customers will look at each of the value proposition elements and say, this one doesn't apply to me. Oh, you're off by a factor of 4 over here. This one, you're about right. And the more the more legs you have to stand on, the less dependent you are on any particular one. And finally, the intangibles. Your company reputation. How well spoken your salesperson is. The lack of spelling mistakes on your website. The consistency of your messaging. All of those intangibles count, but don't count on them to do the deal. And with that, I turn it back to you, Ed.
Well, I'm not going to let you go just yet because I think we have some questions. But first, I want to thank you for a very informative presentation. There's some great advice there, and I appreciate your time and effort for being here today. So let me just quickly switch slides. And hold on. Before we take questions, just a program note. I wanted everyone to know that Leverage Point will be exhibiting at the Professional Pricing Society Fall Conference in Las Vegas. So if you happen to be in Las Vegas at that time and at the PPS conference, it's always a great gathering. We'll be there. Please stop by. We'll be happy to tell you more about us. If you can't wait and you want information now, you'll see below our website as well as contact information for our VP of Sales, Jay Manson. Please get in touch with him if you would like some more information. All right, so let's take on a few questions. I'm going to look to my colleague across the glass here, and Aaron.
First question is the value you're discussing the value of your differentiation or the value of addressing the opportunity?
Well, I think it's both. What you ought to do, though, is focus on your key differences and really emphasize that. I wouldn't ignore the total value that you're delivering, which can be somewhat higher. But the more you focus on what's unique about you and then relegate everybody else to commodity status, the better off you are.
Great. Got another question here. How do you go about setting price for new services or software where there isn't really an identical product out there?
Well, that's a tougher situation, but everybody has a way of looking at the world, and everybody does something right now, and as a result, there's always a substitute. And if there isn't a substitute that somebody can think of and attach a price to, they'll think of one. What's an iPhone? Well, if we didn't say what an iPhone was and all the benefits, people would think of it. Oh, it's just a cell phone, and cell phones are cheap. I mean that's the way you can get away with messing up in terms of your pricing. When you have something that really is new and different and nobody has seen it before, number one, you have a hell of an educational challenge in front of you. which is going to be very costly. But probably you're best off following the advice that I think I heard once from a consultant that says, make the strange familiar and the familiar strange. And so what you really want to do is provide a reference for people that is important to you. Years ago there was a battle in the super mini computer versus mini supercomputer, and everybody wanted a mini supercomputer. Nobody wanted a super mini computer. So there the reference point was a lot different. The reference point was a supercomputer at $2 million, and everybody wanted a mini supercomputer. The other reference point was a mini computer, which was hundreds of thousands, and nobody wanted a super mini computer.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Are there any differences in value propositions in the high-tech software industry versus other B2B industries?
Well, software is really strange. It goes beyond it being a licensed good rather than a good that the title passes, changes hands. I think the opportunity for differentiation in software is much higher than in many hard products. Having said that, I think a lot of the value can only be realized via experience. And getting somebody to try a piece of software, especially if it's disruptive to in-place business processes, can be difficult. But software is strange. It's everybody knows it has no cost of goods, and that's why salespeople tend to give it away, and customers don't value it.
We have time. Yeah, we have time for a couple more.
Okay. What's your recommendation to getting a customer to work with you to evaluate the value proposition of your product, which they already have? It might take more of their time to track metrics and might encourage their competitors to use your service.
Well, first of all, you have to pick the customer properly. You want somebody who you would consider a friend of the family. That's the first thing. I think you can also bind them in with non-disclosure agreements and things like that. But fundamentally, if you're gathering data about metrics, that certainly is useful to you, and your ability to gather those metrics at low cost to your customer or yourself would be very important. If it turns out it's difficult to gather the metrics, A, you may want to rethink them, but B, if they're difficult, figure out a way for the customer to benefit from having those metrics around, showing them, how much their processes have improved over time by using the product.
Okay, I think we have time for one more.
Yep. Are there any tools available for developing these types of value propositions?
I think that's a great question, Jim, don't you?
Oh, I think it's a terrific question. I think I've heard of a company that has a software as a service. What the heck is their name? Leverage Point. How silly. I think there are a number of tools that help people do pricing. Some of them are extremely expensive and extremely disruptive. The Leverage Point product, has many benefits, the least of which is it can be implemented on a small scale and then rolled out. I think also, people are commonly using spreadsheets. But frankly, I think the issue is making sure that you have a consistent, logical way of understanding the economic value proposition, then engaging sales in a discussion about how that ought to be communicated, and then being able to use the Salesforce experience to tweak both the value proposition and the underlying numbers.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking over at Aaron. Was there a last question?
There was just one that just came in that just looked kind of interesting. I figured if we had time, we could get in there.
Let's go for it.
Jim, do you have any brief comments on the recent pricing and branding decisions Netflix has been making?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, I guess one of my comments is it reminds me of New Coke. There's a tremendous amount of PR, even though it may be a little negative. But as one of the Boston politicians said, look, I don't care what you say about me, just spell my name right. And I think Reed Hastings and Netflix are getting an awful lot of, a lot of good press. Was that brief enough? I hope it was.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Actually, there are a number. You can go on the Netflix blog, and there, if you just Google Netflix pricing decision, you'll probably get shorter answers than the one I just gave you.
All right. I think that wraps up our time for today. Again, thanks very much, Jim, for being with us today. It was really great.
And thank you to everybody that's on this call.
Yeah, and likewise, thanks everyone for attending. We'll be posting a recording of this webinar on our site probably next week. We'll also have a PDF download of the presentation, and likewise on Jim's site as well.
Yeah, softwarepricing.com.
Right, softwarepricing.com. You'll find that and more about Jim if you want to talk with him some more. We'll have a webinar next week. We'll be sending out an announcement for that sometime soon. So I hope folks will be able to join us again sometime, and hopefully we'll get Jim back here for another one of our webinars.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, everybody.
All right, everyone. That will do it for this time, and until next time.